Oh Lord, here we go again. I just dropped 2 tabs and I lost my friends. Oh Lord, here we go again. I just dropped 2 tabs and I lost my friends. I'm like, oh Lord, here we go again. I just dropped two.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Rip City Real Talk. It's a new edition. It's me, Craig Moshkow, and my best buddy, Anthony Blaylock, and we actually have a great guest today. He's the host of the Church of Roy podcast. It's Steve from Blazers Edge. How's it going, man?
Hey, happy to be here, fellas. It's been a lot of news, not so much for Portland necessarily, but a lot of stuff gone on in the last week. The new league year is kind of coming into shape, and we're still, navigating a condensed off season. So I'm excited to chat about it.
Yeah, same. Honestly, I think the Blazers made more moves than I would have expected to make in such a flurry. I know we had a bunch of the vet minimums to give out. I was still a little shocked that we went 1, 2, 3 pretty fast on opening day, especially with a guy like Neil, who's typically a bargain shopper. So,
yeah. I have a question. Did you hear about how the league is looking into the anti-tampering stuff because Lonzo signed 30 seconds after the time deadline? It's
you mean he negotiated in 30 seconds?
It was ridiculous.
Not only was it I think the problem is not only was it a negotiated contract, but it was negotiated compensation between two teams. Yes. And I think at that point you're like, this isn't your typical smoking gun in the negotiation period at 3:01 Pacific time. This was the framework was clearly in place, and we can't just put up that, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, nothing happened before. So I don't know. I don't think anything's going to happen, but I think this is probably hey, if you're going to negotiate a complicated sign and trade, maybe give it an hour, fellas. So.
Well, and it's funny because there were rumors that came out even earlier in the day. It's Lonzo Ball is expected to go to Chicago. It's somebody out there knew. So clearly these talks were happening, and it's funny because you guys aren't the first people that said all over Twitter when that first happened. Wow, he picked up the phone and said, deal? Yeah, sure. Let's talk about the deal, the whole compensation afterwards, but we're going to make a deal, right? Yep, cool. And it's crazy.
It is crazy, but the optics of it are hilarious. If Norm re-signs for 5 years with the Blazers, it wouldn't have been a huge deal. But like Steve said, it's because there's all this compensation and all these things going on. It's a bad look for the NBA if they don't find. It's like a parent who doesn't enforce consequences. You're going to raise a spoiled brat. You have to step in at some point and say, dude, you can't do this. At least make us look good in the media. We have to punish you now.
Yeah.
And make it look believable.
And it's crazy to see. I think Shams had it where it was, 4 years, 80 million, turned out to be 4 years, 85 million. The numbers are right on. Mm-hmm. And you're just going, oh man. I mean, I can turn my head the other way when it's, agents talk to other agents talk to these teams, no matter any time of the year. I don't think there's any illusion around this. What does stand out is that the trade compensation was already figured out. And I think that's what the league is going to try to address here.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be fair, I believe we all know it's happening all the time. This stuff goes on, but to make it so blatant and to not really think that over, and now you're going to have to deal with the consequences is silly to me because these owners have to know, these GMs know, we're going to do this right away. People are going to probably talk, and they still decided to go through with it. So,
yeah. I think for Steve, I guess one quick question is, what was your biggest surprise of free agency from the Blazers standpoint? So let's try to get on track with Blazers. What were you surprised about, and what was the probably least surprising thing about free agency for you?
I'm just curious. For me, what stood out initially was I felt that if the Norm thing was going to happen, it was going to be a 301 type signing, and there was a level of just this panic roller coaster because I think we all agree the step one to free agency here was you got to retain Norm Powell because if you're going to take a step forward as a team here and make the Blazers better, make Damian Lillard happy if he is upset, you can't open free agency with a step backwards. So when the first hour rolls by, you're kind of going, oh God, when is this going to happen? Mm-hmm. And then hour 2 rolls by and you're going, okay, still no deal. Feeling a little better about seeing the Spurs spend some money. Mm-hmm. Then Evan Fournier signs for that big deal with the Knicks. Mm-hmm. I'm okay, we're cooking now. And so for me, seeing the Norm deal get done with 5 years really stood out to me initially because what I was hearing going into that negotiation period was it was looking like a 3-year deal from some of the people I talked to that kind of are 50-50 shot. They're right. And so I was going, okay, there's a 3-year framework here, a lot like Gary Trent Jr.'s contract. And to see it come out as 5 years and see it come out at the average it is year over year is such a smart move by the Blazers, because no matter what timeline unfolds after this season, hopefully Damian Lillard is a happy camper here. We're having a championship celebration in a couple of years, or maybe this year. But if not, if they do have to make a move and shake up this roster, you can see Norman Powell at that yearly wage being a positive trade asset, a much different situation than this team finds themselves in with CJ McCollum. So for me, a clear win. And I'll leave it at that. I want your guys' take on it too, because I don't want to take up all the time here, but I think I separate that clearly from the 3 other signings that we saw after that move.
No, I loved it. I mean, I loved every single thing about it, because here's the deal. If Dame is, like you said, unhappy, and after this year, or this trade deadline, or who knows what's going to come with the future of him, if he decides he wants out, great. You move him, you get your compensation back, fine. The next step is probably CJ, because I feel like they're kind of a package deal at this point. If you're going to go into full rebuild mode, you're probably moving on from CJ, and you're bumping up Anthony to take on that bigger role, and that's going to be probably your point guard, at least for a little bit. And it allows you to keep Powell at a really good deal as one of your starting pieces, and opens up the rest of the cap to go build around that. But to see 18 million was, I'm not surprised. I thought he would get 20, north of 20. I was thinking 21, 22. I really did. So to see him come back and get 18 on average is great. And not only that, but it's like 15 something for this year, which is huge when you consider the MLE and what it does to the cap, and allows us to go out there and still have a little bit more money to bring somebody else in than we would have if he would have gone into that 20 million range. And the average ends up being over the cap this year, and all those different things that come into play. And I mean, he was a guy that we knew we could go over to sign, and we didn't have to go over by nearly as much as I expected us to have to go over. Dame's contract is going to continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger for the next couple of years till he hits that 50. That's only going to make things tougher on us. So whether we keep CJ or not, then I mean, having that low for what we got him for is going to be huge down the road as well when you think about the next couple of years.
I think he was waiting for Gary Trent's deal to come out. And so Neil was going to give him more money and more years than Gary got. And if you think about 5 years for Norm, that's a pretty secure contract. So that gives him security for his family. He knows he's going to be at least an asset for Portland. If you want to make a trade and you need to rip it down, that is a tradable contract for them that they can get salary back for. So it's kind of a win-win for the Blazers. We were painted into a corner. You had to pay Norm whatever the heck he demanded. I do think he was waiting for Evan Fournier and some of the other wings to sign before he signed his deal. I do think that he and Neil had like a nudge, wink, wink agreement that he was going to get the money regardless. I think he just wanted to see what the market was going to dictate. And I mean, other than that, there was nothing surprising. The only thing is, like Steve said, the roller coaster of emotions with him posting the eyeball like emojis, and like there was like Instagram things going on and people were freaking out, and it's like, we just got to stay patient.
And I think it's important to mention the context that Anthony brought up is Damian Lillard's contract is going to increase incrementally. It's because the cap is going to go up year over year. Because of the COVID situation, we are stuck in this flat cap era to where when you can lock a player in to a backloaded deal, as the cap goes up, that number is going to remain a positive asset, because by all metrics that we're looking at, hopefully we're going to have fans in the stands from the start of next season. And that cap number, that projection is going to move up, and it's going to move up along with that $15 million figure we see this year. That Norm contract is not only great this year, but it's going to continue to look positive on those cap sheets. And then, I mean, just look at the roster here. You look at what it's done for Robert Covington's trade value, very similar type asset when you look at how that roster or how that contract is constructed. A very solid two-way player, kind of fits right in that threshold of that just above $10 million range. So Norm is by all means going to be a positive asset. But let's be clear. I hope Norman Powell is producing for the Blazers long term next to Damian Lillard, potentially in that CJ McCollum slot. And ideally, that's where we want to see this long-term fit. And we have an opportunity to see that now. And hopefully they can make the right moves around Norm to let him play it at his natural position, hopefully going forward.
Yeah, and especially 5 years. I mean, you do not see too many 5-year deals
No.
anymore.
No.
I mean, some of the guys that get the super maxes, sure, because that's part of that arrangement. But I mean, the LeBrons, the Kawhis, the Anthony Davises, even Lowry was, I think, a 3-year deal in Miami. It's a lot of short deals that these guys are doing now. There's a lot of movement in the last 5-10 years, and there ever has been with superstars and guys moving around. So to get a guy locked up for 5 years, that I think he's probably peaked at this point. He might do a little bit more, but we know what he is. He's going to be a 20-point a game scorer who can shoot the three and is pretty good defense and size for a 6'3" guard. And to have that locked up for 5 years, no matter what happens with Dame and CJ, in this era is pretty impactful and long term, and it's great to see.
Sometimes I think Portland has given out too long of contracts. So in the past, I think that signing guys to 4 years, you didn't need to give Evan Turner 4 years. You didn't need to give Alan Crabb 4 years. And so I think Norm having the leverage in this situation garnered him getting 5 years. I wish we wouldn't pay out so many long contracts, but you do try to match this dude up with Dame, and you try to match him up with these CJ contracts. They're going to go through 2024. Also, having him on the books is not a problem because, like we said, he's a good trade asset. So it was fine. It was all good. I mean, it sets the floor for free agency as a successful free agency. What were we going to do with the TPMLE and the minimum deals that we were going to get? Were we going to bring in Kawhi Leonard? Absolutely not. So you have to have a realistic expectation of the offseason. I think we did last week in our primer. What about I would say the least surprising thing that you saw? Has anybody ordered a Cody Zeller jersey yet, or what's?
I have been a sucker for the backup center jersey in my past, in my fanhood. I in the closet right to my right over here in our guest room, I have a Chris Kaman and his Cantor jersey in there.
Nice.
I don't know if I'm adding a Cody Zeller jersey quite yet. As far as Zeller goes, there was some initial panic also there where we didn't get the details of what that contract was. That contract from the outside looks much different if you are dipping into the taxpayer mid-level exception to sign Cody Zeller. And I had some initial gripes about it. I was a little vocal on Twitter about it. And then it came in that it was a minimum contract, and I'm just not going. You can't really complain about a minimum contract guy, especially when he's a backup. He's not expected to come in and play this huge role. What I am worried, and I don't know if it's overblown, but and his Cantor, say what you want. He had a lot of flaws on the defensive side of the ball. But when Nurk went down, he was there. And there was a floor to that team that you knew you were going to get a certain level of production out of Enes Kanter as a center. Mm-hmm. The problem with Cody Zeller is I think he can replicate that and probably exceed that on his best nights. But if he's not healthy, the whole situation is meaningless. Mm-hmm. And so with a team where you've had poor luck with injury, especially at that position, I am a little concerned about investing in Cody Zeller, but I also think that betting against like previous injury, unless there's something like a smoking gun on his medical evaluation, you can't really go and just say, we're a cursed franchise when it comes to the center position. But it is in the back of my mind. Is Cody Zeller going to be there if they do need him, if something does happen to Nurk? Mm-hmm. But I also have a lot of faith. And this is a subject for later on in the offseason, but I do have a lot of faith in Jusuf Nurkic's ceiling in, he's going into a new contract, and he just strikes me as a type of player who that's not missed on. We've seen him mention it in kind of his exit interviews, saying I want to be in the right situation. And I think he might be really aiming at a big season. I could see him being the type of player who performs well under those circumstances.
Right. And especially, some of the coaching changes, some of the guys that we brought in are really good with bigs and getting bigs to pass and just be, and he's already a good assist guy. So being able to come in there and unlock that, I agree with you. I think he's going to have probably his best year, but going back to what you said, and that was my number one concern is not just the injuries with Nurk per se. I mean, the leg was a freak thing. I think he's over the leg thing, but he had a couple small things that made him miss some time last year too. When you're that big and you're running around with the kind of energy that he does, it weighs on you. It's going to weigh on you. This season should be easier on him because we're not in a COVID season where every game is super condensed. They're playing 4 or 5 games a week or whatever it ends up being. You get more time to rest. That'll help ideally, but injuries aside, the thing with Nurk, again, being as aggressive as he is, he does tend to get in foul trouble. We saw it in playoffs. It probably, at the end of the day, was the bane of this team in the playoffs because our bigs couldn't handle playing against not just Jokic, but tiring themselves out. And then you watch Jermichael Green come in and Paul Millsap and just have their way. And it was tough. It was tough to watch when Nurk would go down. So Zeller, specifically to your point, with the injury history that he's had, I don't think he's played over 60 games, but at least not in the last 5 to 7 years. He's barely hit 50 games. And it may not be one thing medically that concerns you, but it does start to wear you that he misses here and there. He'll miss here and there. And if he's not available to you, at least in the current state of this team, and I do not expect it to last, but the current state of this team, your backup power forward is Greg Brown III. I mean, it's so, who, by the way, I don't know if you guys watched Summer League, looked all right. I mean, he looks to be the part that you drafted him for. Long, athletic, had a lot of alley-oops and dunks, so great. I mean, he's out there. He can get some minutes. But you're looking at Zeller, I worry about the consistency being that backup. Like you said, Cantor, we knew he was there. I mean, he would play bloody nose and all, and he was out there. Zeller, I like what he's going to bring. I think defensively, he's a plus 0.9, I think was last year. So he's going to be a potentially a plus defender. He's going to hustle if nothing else. He's a guy that gets down and dirty. He's not afraid to go and get contact with guys. He's a little quicker and more athletic, I think, than Cantor as far as defense goes, which is going to be good. I just worry about the injuries. And when you talk about
in our free agency primer, we said we wanted a backup center like Nerlens Noel. Now, he got priced out of the range. In fact, he's probably going to be their starting center, depending on how things go. So he got paid starting, and that's fine. Jared Allen, same thing. But what does Neil have against the, shot blocking, rim running, athletic backup bigs? Cantor is not going to provide any athleticism. He doesn't give you any rim protection. I mean, Zeller's a little bit better in both categories, but now he's not above average athleticism. And again, he's kind of a below the rim player when you're talking about this offense. So what is Neil, what is the archetype that we're looking for behind Nurkic, and why is it not that more like Mo Bamba, Bismack Biyombo role?
For me, when just looking at the bigs and how they might be moving forward, is if you listen to what Chauncey Billups has said about the center position in some of what we've seen when he is talking over video from the Clippers last year, is he really can't stop talking about Zubac and what he can do off the short roll and what he can do as a roll man. Gotcha. And Zeller can kind of mimic some of that, but really we've seen that with Neil before, where if you take out the below the rim finishing that Zeller often does, not a great at the rim finisher, good around the basket, but the rest of his game kind of lines up ideally with what Mason Plumlee brought to the table as far as
reminded me of
being smart with the ball, being able to create off the roll when he gets the ball, not necessarily just finishing. He can find that guy from the dunker spot. If Zeller can do that, we've seen that have success, and it really plays into what this team might be trying to do with Nasir Little. Are they going to try to slot him into a Maurice Harkless type role where he's really attacking that baseline? And in the starting lineup, if Norm is in there, Norm is lethal in that spot, coming from the corner where he does space the defense because of his shooting ability and then can get downhill in a hurry. Zeller is perfectly equipped to find those type of guys. Same with Nurk when he's dialed in. It's just the key to keep the frustration down on the defensive end for Nurk a lot of the times. So I get the Zeller signing, but let's be clear, the Hornets, their turnover rate was considerably higher when Zeller was on the floor. And I mean, that just is a product of a lot more playmaking coming out of the post. I think it's just a lot more arms, bodies involved there. You're going to see a higher turnover rate. But if he can do that, I think so much of what the Blazers ran into last season was you had Carmelo, Cantor. These guys were ball stoppers. And now we're seeing this new iteration that hopefully you're going to see some more ball movement and you're going to see them breaking down defense. I mean, Billups consistently talked about breaking down backline defense with a roll man and just, collapsing the defense around that person. And they kind of have the personnel to do that if they do thread this needle. But the problem with these signings is the margin for error is so slim. And we kind of knew that. We didn't expect this to be like a huge thing, but like the window for success is tiny here.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that too. The ball movement was when I was looking up Zeller. I mean, his assist numbers aren't obviously great. I mean, they're not going to be for a guy who plays 20 minutes a game and he's a center, but he does seem to have the ability to recognize and be able to spot that. And when you talked about Little as one guy, Derek Jones Jr. is at this time still on this roster, and he's probably going to get minutes off the bench. I would think right now that he's going to get minutes off the bench. So if you have both of them out there with their athleticism, their ability to attack the rim, if you have a big like him that can recognize that and make those passes, especially when you have shooters out there, you're gonna have Simons and you're gonna have either Mclemore or Snell, and we'll get to them in a sec. But one of those two guys is going to be out there who can shoot the three. I like it. I like having a big that's going to be able to come in and recognize and be able to make more passes, because Cantor wasn't a great passer. It shouldn't have been. It's not his fault. I mean, that's not what his role is. It's not what he's done in the NBA. Carmelo, respectively, was a decent passer, but again, his role on the bench was not to pass. It wasn't to create. It was to give me the ball and I'm going to shoot it. So fine, those guys did what they did, but having that down there now, to me, is great. And when I start talking about some of these other names, and we'll get to it near the second half of the pod, with the MLE and things like that, there's other guys that I like that are going to do that same type of role, especially from a big man perspective, because of the other assets on the bench that we have. So I think for that, for vet men, you can't ask for a better signing than Zeller. I mean, all those backup centers are realistically about the same. I really like Gorgie Jang. I would have liked to see him because he can shoot and do a lot of defensive things down low, but those guys kind of got priced out. They all got those $5-7 million contracts, and they were kind of gone. So
yeah,
for what was out there, for what we're going to get, I'm happy with Zeller. The injuries concern me, obviously, because of the lack of depth after that, and with Nurk's history and foul trouble, you worry about having big bodies. I don't want to be in another situation where granted, Moses Brown turned into something, but that year we're having Skull, and I mean, all these guys were out there, like, you're throwing out just bigs off the streets in the G League to try to make do for a while.
Yeah.
So hopefully we don't get to that point when it comes to Zeller. Fingers crossed, but yeah, I think we all agree that for the price range and what he's going to bring to the offense, a little bit more evolved than what we had with Cantor.
If you guys want to do a 12-minute Ben Mclemore, if you want to do this, I'm so down, but I think we could just skip it, because if this guy's playing more than 20 to 22 minutes a game, we are in dire straits. Absolute. The season has gone awry. So I don't think we need to cover it. Just a minimum dude, totally fine. Good wing, sniper, it's fine.
Well, Zeller took more time because I think the backup big situation was more important to the health of the team. But
he was fine. He's bench filler. Like, it's all good. And then, okay, so I guess my question is, we know what the starting five is going to be. There is a serious hole at power forward, and I think Blazers Twitter has identified that hole as a trade piece. So, Steve, what's your next move? And Ant's going to go through some of his stuff too, but what's your kind of big next move that you see after free agency?
I mean, I don't mean to be a downer here, but I think just by how Neil has operated in the past, this is kind of the zone we see where not a lot of stuff happens. And Derek Jones Jr. could be a trade piece, but typically, like we saw with Ariza, that his contract was moved before the draft. Rodney Hood, similar situation, hung on to him until the trade deadline and made a move. I don't think we're going to see a move of consequence until the trade deadline. And that's just my assumption. I think to get the three veterans that they did to Summer League, I think there was probably some implication that one of those performers might be in line for an actual roster spot, whether that be Moutier, Kenneth Faried, or Michael Beasley. I don't know if we see much here. As far as Ben Mclemore goes, I'm not going to go on 12 minutes, but I will say about Ben Mclemore and Tony Snell is they put themselves in a position where only one of those guys has to exceed expectations. If one of those guys plays above that contract level, that's a win. And that's at a position of need. You kind of have the best of both worlds, where Ben Mclemore was this blue chip prospect and came in and kind of went to a really weird situation with the Kings. And then, your career can derail quickly from there. So he's kind of a low efficiency version of what Tony Snell is, where Tony Snell is the opposite, where he just hasn't produced in big minutes. His minutes have consistently gone down after once he arrives somewhere, kind of peters out, but he's been an off and on starter for his entire career. And he's very efficient last year. Now those numbers were not at volume, but if you somehow combine like these guys into a Frankenstein monster or catch them on their hot streaks throughout the season, you could be, lucky your way into an actual significant role player there. So we'll see. I don't think, as far as moving forward, I don't see anything too crazy going on outside of if one of these guys really performs well and they like his veteran presence on this Summer League team, maybe they sign him to a minimum contract for this next year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I think Snell and Mclemore. I keep saying Snell. I don't know why I'm doing that. Snell and Mclemore. I don't. I'm not sure why I'm doing it. But I think both of them are the same thing. They were brought here to be the same thing. I was kind of surprised overall that we put two of those minimum spots towards guards. I mean, Snell's 6'6". I mean, he could easily play small forward if you need him to, but they're essentially guards, and they're both guards that do one thing realistically, and that's shoot the three. Snell's been down. He's been mid to high 30% last couple of years, but overall his career he's been mostly in the 40s, which I'm all for. I love it, and he's big and long, and like you said, he has a lot of experience and a lot of rosters where he played in pretty good roles. Mclemore, I didn't like that signing. That was probably my least favorite signing, and only because even his three percentage has been mid 30, low 30 the last couple of years. I mean, he's touted as this great shooter, but he really overall hasn't been overly impressive with that. His field goal percentage is terrible. I mean, it's low 30s. He just doesn't he doesn't play great defense. Yeah. I just don't see his role on the team when you talk about guys like Anthony kind of potentially breaking out ideally this year. And even with Snell, like I know he's going to come in here and his job is threes. He can shoot 40% from three. I get you, Snell. I understand why you're here. Mclemore was surprising considering the depth at bigs that we have. And we still have Derek Jones. We have some of these other guys that can really kind of play that if we have to, shooting guard, small forward role that are already here. So I was surprised. I didn't like the Mclemore signing. Snell was great because of his size, and I think what he's done historically for the teams he's been on. But I mean, their job's here to shoot, and it's good to have depth, and they're veterans, which is another thing that I like. You know, the last couple of years, especially under Stotts, it seems like our depth at some of these positions, a lot of young guys, G League guys that kind of got bumped up. You know, the Jalen Hordes of the world, the Winion Gabriels, and sometimes when you saw some of the injuries that the team got hit with, that they didn't. You know, it was tough to run with. So having vets does help, but I was surprised that we went out and got two guards that really are their jobs to shoot three when we have the lack of bigs that we have. And even as we talked about with Zeller's injuries, you would think that he'd want to make some kind of move to shore up that. And I think that's where Craig was getting at. I don't think we'll make a trade. I mean, sell my house if we could get Laurie Markin in here for Derek Jones in a sign-in trade, but it's not going to happen.
Right.
So I think if anything, they use the MLE to get another big. Millsap has been a name that's been floating around. I've wanted him for the last couple of years. You know, when I thought maybe he was starting to work his way out of Denver, just with the guys that they brought in. So you talk about Zeller and what he does with the passing game. I mean, Millsap historically has been a great passing big. He's no Draymond Green. He's not going to be that, but he can play that similar role on the bench where you have guys like Anthony, who I still think is developing his distribution game. He's been brought in to be a point guard, and I saw flashes last year where it really looked good. He was starting to make good decisions, but he's also maybe just lack of experience and minutes consistently. He's still raw. And just having a vet like Millsap to bring in there and to use that role to really kind of bog down the offense and control things, make passes, set screens, get rebounds, do that dirty work, things that Carmelo wasn't able to do last year in that backup power forwards position. I mean, I watched Melo get beat by Millsap over and over in the playoffs. I still think he's got some juice in him, and that to me is the perfect signing to use, whether it be the MLE or if you can get him here in the biannual or whatever it ends up being. But that's my one at this point shot that I'd like to see Neil take and to bring in just to get that depth and have a vet with tons of playoff experience that can do a lot of those things that you mentioned that Zeller potentially could do.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at free agency, do you guys ever see that movie Vegas Vacation? When Clark has to go to that really weird backdoor casino and play rock, paper, scissors. That was Neil at free agency. That guy's gambling in a different casino than everybody else. He just has no money, and it's not his fault that we've allocated all these funds. But at the same time, like that's literally where we were at. So when you look at Snell and you look at Mclemore, I think that there's two reasons that we signed those two guys, and then we'll move forward. But the two things are basically, number one, they know their role, and number two, they're going to be good character guys. And that's one thing that I will give Neil credit for over the last 9-10 years. He's done a good job of bringing in guys who don't make waves on the bench. I think Mo was probably the one time where there was leaks that he was unhappy. You're not going to hear that about Tony Snell. You're not going to hear that about Mclemore. So I think that's why you look at him. I do think that there's a huge gap with power forward, and I think Steve hit on it earlier. I actually think that Michael Beasley or Fareed, one of the two, is going to earn like a two-way or a permanent deal, whatever you have to do to vet min these guys. I don't know whether they are long-term situations, but you need a 6'9", 6'10" guy who can play power forward. and they're both experienced, and we need experience on this team after letting Cantor and Melo go. Do you disagree with that at all?
No, just to be clear on those guys, they're both, those names mentioned are above the threshold for minimum games played and years played to be on a two-way contract. So that will be a veteran minimum contract.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there is an option for another one of these players on this team, maybe a Mark Vital, who I really like. I didn't get to. The game is recorded for today, but I'm hoping to watch it later. But there's some other two-way options here for guys to pop and bring in. I just wonder, as far as the Blazers' current situation, let's be very clear. The assets and the cap sheet that are on this is a team that has been assembled by Neil O'Shea. So this is a situation that he has created and he is going to navigate his way out of, hopefully. Now, he has protected the asset that was Gary Trent Jr. He's avoided losing that by retaining Norm. So credit where credit is due. Sure. It's just a matter of threading the needle on there. Now, so if you buy into the idea that they are going to sign one of these veteran guys, that will bring, I believe, the roster up to 14 players. I think that is where this team will sit going into the season. I don't think you're going to see the 15th man, just because it opens them up for more flexibility on the trade market, where they're not waiving someone or just, a sunk cost in one of these assets. I am curious what Millsap's market is, mainly because Golden State has kind of locked their situation up with Andrew Iguodala heading back. So I think there is
Bielitsa.
The what now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was actually terrified that Bielitsa was going to come to the Blazers because
he's such a Blazer kind of guy too.
That was going to go on the copy paste board when I'm writing recaps of
are you talking about big Mario Hezonja? Is that what you're talking about?
Mario Hezonja was up there. As far as some of these high efficiency guys like Tony Snell that we've seen come in. I mean, Tony Snell, 109 3-point attempts last season, 56% on him. That's just too low of a volume over a whole season to really look at. Right. Very impressive. What we have seen this in the past is the Blazers thought they had a stretch for on a vet minimum contract in Anthony Tolliver, and we all remember how that worked out. I mean, he was traded at the deadline. It just didn't work. So hopefully they can avoid that and kind of slot Snell in here. But when you look at the overall scheme of how they're trying to build this second unit, by putting a guy like Tony Snell on it and Cody Zeller next to Anthony Simons and Nasir Little, you're putting those guys in a situation where Ant and Nasir are going to be the centerpieces on offense, where maybe in the past, Carmelo Anthony and Enes Kanter have kind of snuffed those shots out. And they've taken the air out of the ball for those other two, especially Ant. So I would really think if I was betting on a player that might really outperform last year's production, it is Anthony Simons. And I mean, I'll be very clear. I've been an Anthony Simons guy since he came into this league, but I really think he's set up for success. And I think he's crossed that threshold that I always talk about with these young players, where you've been on the scouting report now and these other teams have taken away what you really like to do and you found a way to overcome that. And now Ant gets to enter a season like that with a former point guard as his head coach, with Damian Lillard coming back from the Olympics, with CJ McCollum. These are all guys that can just download their knowledge of that position into him. And now he has the functional knowledge of performing when other teams have an eye on him when he takes the court, and he has willing ball movers next to him in those second units. So he's a guy I'm really bullish on what he could potentially do this next season.
Right there with you. I mean, I think the thing we've talked about it in the pod before, but my thing with Anthony that I really want to see is attacking the rim more. And he did it near the end of the year. He started getting better. The guy's so athletic that I think when he starts to develop that and he starts to get away from the 70%, attempts percentage that he took from three or whatever it was, I think that's going to make guys honest, and that's going to be his next step to his game. And then he's going to be perfect. He's going to be exactly what we need. And he started to do it more. That's one of the things with Stotts and young guys is they kind of fall out, and he just didn't get enough playing time to really see it. And that's because, you move CJ in the second unit a lot. Him and Dame would play off of each other when one was resting. That's just how the rotations kind of works. We don't really know for sure what we're going to get from Chauncey, but I imagine you're going to see more of the young guys playing bigger minutes off the bench instead of doing the whole CJ comes in and takes over thing. So I'm right there with you. I hope that's the case. And we've kind of talked about wanting a backup point guard because I really like to see Ant play off ball more. But I do think, depending on what they decide to do, if we see more of a CJ playing with Ant kind of combination like we did last year, but allowing Ant to really take over more of the scoring load, I'm right there for it. I think Jones is going to probably shift into the small forward spot. I just don't see how you don't put him out there. You're going to need somebody with defense because Zeller, yeah, fine, he's all right, but realistically, Anthony's raw on the defensive side. Little, again, athleticism's there, great, but you saw a lot of lapses last year. He's just young, so it's going to take him a while to get good at playing defense if he does push that power forward. So I think Jones goes out there and plays with them. I just liked Millsap for the idea of moving the ball. I just wanted somebody else that can go out there and kind of slow things down and be able to distribute and take advantage of cutters like Jones and Little and be able to hit them, kind of like what you think Zeller might be able to do, and where Anthony really started to look like he was doing better and better at the end of last year. So we'll see. They might just keep the MLE for a while and wait till some of the bargains start to come down. The guys start to, that next week in the free agency start to drift off. So.
Well, and there's also there's a buyout market, right? I mean, you're looking at guys that are going to
get you save those positions.
Bought out. Exactly. And so it's a smart thing to hang back a little bit and say, I know that I'm not going to pick somebody up who's going to start for me. I could pick up somebody who's a fringe level sixth man if I just am patient. And there's still deals swinging for Lowry Markkanen. There's all this stuff going on. And the longer these deals take,
get me excited.
And the more money gets locked up, the more you're able to play in that space if you're Neil holding 2 cards instead of a full deck. So at this
point, there's injuries and there's all those other things, right, that you want to save this stuff for sure. So
quick question as we sort of segue into a topic that I don't really want to be the expert on, so I'm going to toss it over to Steve. So how do you think Dame, and what did you make of Dame's presser at the Olympics where he basically said, we tried to get some guys, we weren't able to? He sounded, I don't want to use the word dejected, but he sounded down a little bit. What did you make of that, and what's your take there?
I think he's in a tough position when you just consider who he's around when he's at that. I mean, you have, Kevin Durant, who already has an established, stable of stars around him. You have, Draymond Green, who, they get 2 lottery picks added to the team. They get Andrew Iguodala back. These are top level guys, and Damian Lillard is at this function with Cody Zeller, Tony Snell, Ben Mclemore. That's what he's bringing to the conversation. So
sad.
To think that those super competitive athletes are not giving each other a hard time about stuff like that, I doubt it. I guarantee Draymond is at least in Dame's ear when it comes to that. That said, I think the first part of Dame's quote on that obviously gets the headlines of, we didn't get some of the guys we want, but the guys we did get are here to try to do what we're doing here. Basically, they're guys that are buying into this culture. They're coming here on a veteran minimum. They know what they're getting into. They are Portland guys. Let's just say that. So I think neither of which are very encouraging, how he started that quote, how he finished that quote, but I think they do balance each other out. I think it's very clear that the Blazers, barring a trade, the only way that this roster was roster was never going to shift in free agency. They just didn't have the tools to do it. And they avoided the doomsday situation where they lose Norman Powell to another team. So at least they're on level footing. But, the work is still to be done. This is still an incomplete grade on the scorecard. So I don't think that's lost on Damian Lillard. I think that kind of is what his quotes reflect. But, it's hard. It's hard when – Cody Zeller, who, I will compete with him as we have very similar hairlines. I don't think that's what you want to be talking with all these guys about. So I think it puts him in a tough spot.
And I'm glad you brought that up. It's a good segue to the next little bit and talking about, the Olympics, because not just his performance, but I have some other questions that kind of have to do with him being in the Olympics that tie into the free agency and stuff. Before I think we segue to the second half of the podcast and get into that, I don't have a good one this week, man. I'm sorry. I was kind of panicking before I got on. I know it's everybody's favorite segment, and I think I skimped out a little bit on this one. I couldn't think of anything super clever.
Who do you got?
So I'll get right to it. The Blazing New Trails Player of the Week, a person that was once ours and is now others. I went with Robin Lopez because he went to the Magic. So people haven't followed him for a while. He's kind of bounced around a little bit. He was asked in Washington last year, I believe, and then he signed a deal to go to the Magic, and I love it. I don't know why I love him in Orlando. I just think it's a young, fun team. He's always been just a fun guy. And he's so good at motivating people. I personally don't know of anybody else on the bench that gets me as hyped as Robin Lopez, fighting mascots, like the whole 9 yards. So happy for him. People don't know. I think it was a $5 million deal to go to Orlando for a year. So, keep your eyes out when we play them. They have Mo Bamba. They obviously have some other guys there that play center for them. So I don't know what his role is going to be. But I love his fit there. I just think being your Disney and Universal and all this stuff, he's a big comic book guy. When he was here, everybody knows he fit the Portland bill perfectly. Mm-hmm. I kind of brought him up because he's one of those centers that I would have liked to have come back. I was surprised he got $5 million, honestly, from Orlando. When we were talking about a list of centers, I don't really know if we touched on his name too much, but as a guy to come back to Portland, mm-hmm. I would have loved what he brings as a backup big. So good for Orlando. Good for what do they call him? He's Brolo. No, he's Rolo. Brolo's obviously Brooks. Well, Brooks the famous one, so he's kind of like Brooks' little brother. I don't know. He's just twin, but that's my Blazers New Wales player. So like I said, couldn't really think of anything super clever. There's been some guys I know that are in coaching right now and moving around, but hey, gotta love free agency. Figured I'd talk about a free agent and a guy that I would like to have when we talk about backup bigs. So that's that. So now we'll segue into Dame in the Olympics. The quotes we've talked about, I think we talked about a little bit last week. This Dame drama has been going on for weeks now, obviously.
A month.
But it's exactly what Steve said. You're around these guys. Like, the pressure that it takes, and you've seen all these guys. You get Kevin Durant, who's got championship experience. You have Draymond, who's got championship experience, who, he's pretty close with, if you're to believe some of the talks. They're buddies right now when they were down there. So it's got to weigh on them. And I don't take the quotes for too much. I don't look too far into it like some people do. He's not dumb. He is exactly like you said. He knows we don't have money. He knows that. He's the reason why when you look into it. I mean, realistically, with the Supermax, it makes it really tough for any of these guys. I think, if anything, he's probably seeing the Lakers just go out and get all these ridiculous names for the prices that they got, and you wonder why you don't get that here. It's like, why don't guys want to come play with me? I'm Damian Lillard. Like, why can't I get the Kelly Oubre for $5 million? Why can't I go out and get, I bring that up because there was a report that he tried to recruit him. So sure. You see some of that stuff, and it's like, man, what could have Dwight Howard as a backup center? I mean, Andre Drummond as a backup center for a vet man. Like, I don't know what his preference is, of course, but I think when you see that, that's probably weighs him down. When you see some of these quotes, I would imagine that he's more concerned that guys aren't coming to Portland on cheaper deals, taking a lot less money to come play with him. When you see the Clippers get certain names that they're getting now, and you see guys go to Brooklyn. I mean, they got every all-star power forward from 10 years ago on their roster. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so I think that's when you see some of these quotes, I think that's where his frustration lies. And I think that's more so than he doesn't expect us to go out and get Kawhi Leonard. Realistically, I mean, not unless you're going to make a trade or whatever that the future brings, but I just think being there and hearing some of these names and seeing some of the, like, you're around Kevin Durant, you hear all the guys that go to Brooklyn, that's got to weigh on him. And I think just being in Tokyo surrounded by this talent, we talked about it last week with Beal. I mean, look at Beal going back and forth. He came out and quoted Damian Lillard and wanted to be just like him. He was going to be super loyal to Washington. And he's another guy that's like, so maybe I don't want to be, in Washington anymore. So it's just kind of, I think it impacts all those guys being around that kind of talent and being some of those guys. You're going to come out, you're going to be frustrated, and you're going to say things. So,
but so if I'm the Blazers front office and I'm Neil and I'm playing this game, here's what I think. Dame comes back home. Things settle down. They start practicing. They start playing together. They start gelling a little bit. He's going to talk himself into, we're probably like a 4, 5, 6 middle range Western Conference seed. But Dame has been that before, and he's been that David who has slayed the Goliath, and he's outslugged other players, and he's beat other players one-on-one. I mean, he took it against Westbrook and OKC. He's gone head-to-head with different people. He's taken out the Rockets by himself, basically, in 2014. So if you are the Blazers front office, you're saying, we couldn't land the people we exactly wanted to, but on a budget, we were able to add a couple guys, give you some depth. You have a new coach. You can sell him on this being a revamped situation. The Chris Haynes pod came out this week and basically said, like, Dame's going to wait for a while. I do think we have till at least the trade deadline. So if we have a puncher's chance, I do think Dame is going to be fine. I think things will settle down. I do think the Olympics was just a perfect storm of media bad stuff happening for Portland, and it has not been a very good offseason in general. But at the end of the day, they got to stop pointing fingers, and then when Dame gets back, it's focus on winning a championship.
And Steve, I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
In regards to that, do you think Dame being in the Olympics in Tokyo right now, had any kind of effect on him being able to do any kind of recruiting? Do you think it's, as far as the team goes, do you think that impacts what Portland's able to do in free agency, not having Dame sitting here being able to call some of his buds and texting guys? I don't really think it does, but I've seen different people come out and say it does. And I'm just curious, you being around it, what you think.
I mean, look, historically, let's look at a situation where they've had Dame and CJ both involved in these negotiations. They put $90 million on the table for Chandler Parsons. Chandler Parsons went to Memphis, which, turned out to be a blessing. But I don't really – I think Damian Lillard, with how everything's connected and who he's talking to, I think he's able to effectively recruit over there as much as he is here, maybe even more so over there.
Okay.
As far as his overall happiness goes, I do wonder, as far as, yes, I don't think there's any illusion that Portland had limited tools, but I do wonder if there was a player out there that Dame felt that the team should have thrown the taxpayer mid-level exception at, that maybe they didn't. JaVale McGee might have been one of those guys.
Sure.
We'll see. I'm sure we'll know more as more information comes out and the dust kind of settles on this. That would be my only concern, where he might not have been happy with how free agency played out. As far as his overall experience in the Olympics, I think it was probably pretty humbling. Like, I think him getting benched down the stretch in a lot of these games, being a defensive liability, and that's what played him off the floor, especially in international competition. Maybe that lights a fire under him. And then also, too, just from an overall presence, he had a lot of nice things to say about Terry Stotts, but this is a player that has had the same voice in the locker room his entire career. I think now he has been around, Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich, obviously, Udoka, some of these other voices, and he might be more receptive to that feedback now, where this is the only real setup outside of a few all-star weekends, which those are kind of a joke, where he's heard this other voice from top level NBA coaches. So I'm interested to see if he's going to come back, be more receptive, especially after running into some defensive problems, where he might be more receptive to that feedback from Chauncey Billups once he gets back to Portland. They get their feet on the ground, but that's wishful thinking. I still think there has to be either some big improvements, and I think what you're really trying to sell Damian Lillard on, and certainly something Neil has hit on multiple times this offseason, is they feel that with this starting five in place, they have one of the best starting fives in the league. There's certainly some metrics that support that, and now they just have to hope it bears itself out in the season. They hope they have a bench that's competent to support that and not surrender leads all the time. And I think that's the biggest selling point you have for Dame going forward.
Yeah. And you got to hope that Billups, especially being a point guard himself, is going to be able to take care of that defensively. Obviously the gripe with fans has been him and CJ. We saw Dame's defense front and center and how it affected them and how he got, like you said, benched in late games for it. CJ's never been known as that, so they're going to have to work around that. We got to see it. Dame's overall Olympics is the next thing I kind of want to talk about. So 12 points, which is all right, but he only shot, I think what I have the numbers at, 37% field goal overall, 36 from three, which is, I was surprised. Honestly, I thought he would shoot a little better, especially being in international play with all these all-stars around him, but it's also kind of a weird vibe when these guys don't work with each other. They only have a certain amount of time to practice with each other. They're not moving the ball like you would probably see in a normal game. But I was kind of shocked, and really his three-point percentage, especially he had a 50% game, I think, against the Czech Republic. It was Iran or one of those, the second game that they played. And the first one he was in the 40s, and then after that it was 20s. Like all the medal games were in the 20s. I was surprised. I was kind of hoping he would go ball out in the Olympics and really just show up, and it would be fun to watch him. And I was a little disappointed in him.
I think there's a place for balling out, and that place is at the NBA All-Star game. The place to not try to play hero ball and try to put up 40 or 45 and pad your stats is when you have Greg Popovich and Steve Kerr coaching you, because if you don't move the ball or you're not playing unselfish defense, and what I mean by that is like giving your effort 24/7, then they will pull you. And I think Dame learned that lesson. He got a short hook. Like, I don't give a damn what your name is. If you're not doing your job and you're not ball stopping and you're not doing the things I need you to do, I'll pull you. So I definitely agree with you. I definitely wish that we could have seen some more stuff. And at first, it seemed like Dame was like featured on this team. He seemed like he might have been the best player on the team.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, posters and all sorts of interviews of pop.
It's just the situation. It's just time and place, you know.
Yeah, I'm not ragging on him. I was just talking about it.
Yeah.
I think he was definitely, I mean, let's make no illusion about this. I mean, he was marketed as, 1A, 1B with Kevin Durant as the stars on this team. I will say a couple things outside of just, this isn't your time to play hero ball isolation style. The other things that factor in here is it is a significantly different ball than what the NBA plays with. A lot of what Lillard does on that touch from beyond the arc is very dependent on stuff like that. The other thing too is, the international rules are a lot more lenient with hand checking on the perimeter. Yeah. You saw Lillard a few times get into those 3-point shots right after a screen where he's not necessarily in rhythm looking for a call that is just never going to come with international referees. Also, his numbers overall, as far as totals, are obviously going to come down a little bit because the games are shorter. But it was just I think it was very clear that Damian Lillard is not a true like Chris Paul point guard. And we've all known that in Portland, and it was very obvious for everybody else after this Olympics that that's just not what he does. He is at his best when he is creating for himself and drawing the entire defense in, which that's how he gets his assist numbers up, is to kick out of those situations. But that's just not what this Team USA was built to do, and not what they were willing to do in this competition.
Yeah, I was just curious. I mean, I just like to talk about it because it was just funny. I mean, like you were saying, it was 1A, 1B. It was Kevin Durant and him, especially early. And really the first two games before you saw Holiday and Booker and some of the other guys show up after the finals were over, which I think impacted things as well because Holiday took a lot of point guard duties from him and it actually distributed quite a bit and played big minutes. I don't know, I was hoping to get the team at least come out and hit some big threes, and the percentages were low. And I was just like, and I get all those stuff come into play, but I was just curious. It was cool to see him get a gold medal. I'm glad he did. I'll be honest. I had a charter fishing trip at 5:30 in the morning in Depot Bay. I took off at 2, and so we got to like the third quarter, and I turned the game off. Like, we get France. It's done now. Kevin Durant's. We only win by 5. So I'm a little nervous there, but I'm happy he ended up getting it. We talked about it. A lot of these guys, when you get the gold medal, it's a big deal. It's really cool to see. He was already kind of starting to creep up there to where, more Olympic chances Dame was going to get anyway. Probably one more if he keeps playing at the level he's playing at, but glad he got it. So I'm super stoked for him there. I have a couple other things I want to cover to end this pod, and we'll kind of let you do your thing. We'll see if Craig has any questions. Craig always comes up with questions.
I got something. Yeah.
I'm sure you do. So about CJ becoming the president of the Players Association and whatnot, do you think that helps us when it comes to either trade value or just what do you think that does to CJ on the team? Do you think that has any kind of impact on him or the team moving forward as far as his relationships he's going to get and things like that?
I think CJ is a really good he's a really good advocate for the league. I think that he's really well spoken and he's a really smart guy. And obviously Chris Paul is aging his way out of the league, and he's probably at a point now where he has other things going on. Sorry, man, like it's true. But CJ is coming up on his prime, and I think CJ is just a really smart, business savvy person who's right there at his prime, but also isn't going to too many NBA All-Star games to not attend meetings. So, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like he's the perfect candidate to me, unless, Steve, you have something else to color in here.
I think just from a few standpoints, I think for the Blazers benefit-wise, I think for the players, you're going to see them, really be smart with their money and how they negotiate contracts. I mean, that is the union side of things. I also think as far as COVID protocols go and buying into what the league is trying to do, you've seen the union and the league really try to work together to make sure that these policies, one, make sense, and two, that they're followed. And I think having CJ in place could really have a benefit for the Blazers. I don't think it's any mistake that the Blazers were one of the first teams to be fully vaccinated and having CJ on the team. I think looking forward to that, I think CJ will play a part in that. As far as his place in the league, I think it's always good for the league to at least put someone from a small market in that position to let them advocate on behalf of players and show that you can rise to a position of prominence no matter what the market is. I mean,
Agreed.
yes, it is
I
with
love
the
it.
union, but I think it is a good look to have CJ McCollum there, a guy who's done everything right, a late lottery pick out of a small school, using his Lehigh education to get where he is. He's a solid ambassador to the league, and I think he's going to have a long career long after he hangs up his basketball shoes.
Yes.
So
Yep.
I think this is all natural for him, and I think it's a position he's going to fit in perfectly.
Yeah, love to hear it. I agree with you. I think he's interviewed people before. He's done a lot of stuff with other players anyway, even outside of just normal basketball stuff. I mean, basketball related, but a lot of other roles where he has his own podcast. He has guys on his show. He does things like that, which I think kind of set him up for this role. But that's it. That's all I got as far as the topics I wanted to cover specifically. I mean, we kind of, again, weird week. Most of it was just Olympics and more game rumors, which will probably never stop. It's going to be content all summer. I love it.
Yeah.
But Craig, do you have anything you want for Steve here?
I want to ask you guys just a couple quick questions about just free agency in general. So take yourselves out of the Blazers mindset for a second. Just look at it as an NBA fan. What was your least favorite contract or most surprising contract that you heard? Because this was a relatively down year with the cap not going up and everything that's going on and not a lot of teams with money. So Steve, what was a contract that maybe was like, whoa, that guy got that much money? Or
I mean, you have to pay him that just because he got your team to the finals, but paying Chris Paul that type of money at this point in his career was a little shocking. Not necessarily the year, what he's going to get paid this year, but just that it goes so long into his career.
Yeah.
I think that was a little eye-opening for me. As far as other moves, I was a little surprised Evan Fournier really got a lot of money to a Knicks team that I'm kind of wondering how Evan Fournier fits into a Tom Thibodeau situation. Like I don't really see it, but I could be wrong. Those are the two that kind of stand out to me. Also, I mean, if we want to keep it Portland, the Spurs made a hell of an investment in Zach Collins in 3 years, 20
Yes.
And I could see that more being a 2-year deal, a prove it deal. 3 years is that's a pretty hefty investment. I mean, it could make them look smart, but it also could be, from what we've seen, 11 games in 2 years. If it's that type of production you're getting down there, that's pretty tough, especially with what San Antonio has the tools they have to make their team better.
Yeah, agreed. I think I already stated mine. I mean, obviously with Jared Allen for me, it blew my mind. You still have Kevin Love's ridiculous contract, and the guy can barely play anymore. I mean, I like Kevin Love, don't get me wrong.
They just drafted Mobley too.
Yeah, I was a little shocked that they wanted to give Jared Allen that kind of money. It was weird to me. Otherwise, I mean, I didn't really have anything else that completely threw me off. Chicago, I mean, the Ball, then getting DeRozan, and then they just spent a lot of money, which is kind of shocking because they have Ball. To me, was an interesting move for Chicago anyway, because I really kind of like what Kobe White was doing there for a while, and I liked him and Levine together. So you invest a pretty decent draft pick on him. He's only been here for a couple of years, and you just basically say sorry, bye to him. But I think Jared Allen to me was it's just too much money to give to a center who really hasn't. I mean, he's good. He puts up good numbers. Don't get me wrong, but he doesn't put up $25 million a year numbers. I don't know. So that was interesting. There wasn't a lot of guys out there this year. I mean, there really wasn't a lot of big names. Lowry, probably a good deal to go to the Heat. They need a good point guard, so sure. I still would like to see the details of the Kawhi deal. I'm kind of interested to see what they decide to do. If it's another short-term deal, that knee's got to scare him a little bit. So I can't imagine it's anything crazy there. So he's probably not going to play much this year anyway. He's going to come back late when he does come back. So I'm interested to see if it's a 2-year thing, get him back for playoffs, hope he stays healthy, and then have another option next year, what have you. But, yeah. Does Schroeder get his money?
Oh, boy, I didn't hear Schroeder.
Did he get his money? I heard Schroeder was there's Boston talks was with him. Did he get his 20 mil? Because that guy, let me tell you, made a mistake. That's all I'm going to say. Like, what
was the contract on that, Steve?
I don't know if he's signed yet. The word is that he is the Celtics are interested, but the rumor was that he turned down a $21 million deal with the Lakers, which
back in February. What?
I don't know if that's agent speak or if that's an actual reality, but I'm sure it was a double-digit contract that he turned down, and that is, those are tough. Those are tough to come back from. As far as the Bulls go, not to derail too much, but I think Lonzo Ball and Kobe White together moving forward makes sense. And this could be a leverage play for Zach Collins, who's coming up on an extension potentially or leaving in free agency, to let him know that Chicago can move forward without him, especially with DeRozan. So those three guys being there, I don't think is coincidence. But yeah, Chicago did spend a weird amount of money, and they're just in a team that's in a
They signed somebody else too, didn't they? It was DeRozan, it was Ball, and it was another prominent name.
They got Caruso too. They got Caruso to
Caruso. That's the other. That was the weird one, and that's what I was thinking of. I knew it was something with Chicago. I was surprised that it's Caruso because of the guards. Because you have Levine, you had White, you got Ball 3 minutes after free agency started, and then that's what I was thinking of. I couldn't remember his name, and I don't know why I should have gone with that angle at first. But Caruso, out of all the teams, I was surprised that Chicago. I mean, kind of like you said with New York and Fournier, there's a certain fit there. It's like you just had money and you just spent it because you had it, and that gets teams in trouble sometimes. I mean, it's gotten New York in trouble plenty of times in the past. So
I could, if I'm a Blazer fan, if I'm thinking about this, okay, so I'm looking at this as a Blazer fan, I'm saying if my team gave Jared Allen $100 million, I could maybe talk myself into that because of his youth. If my team gave DeMar DeRozan 3 years and $80 million, or Chris Paul a 3-year, and you're locking yourself into this asset. The other one is Evan Fournier. The Knicks just overspent in general. They locked themselves into a bunch of deals that don't make a ton of sense to me when you could just keep that cap space and keep pushing for big guys. I don't quite understand all that. But I just look at it through that lens, and I say, if I can talk my team into this contract, am I happy? And I'd be really pissed if my team just gave DeMar DeRozan 3 years for how limited he is as a player. Now, the Bulls are locked into a playoff spot in the East, probably, but man, that felt real heavy to me.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of money in one spot, and just with the Knicks, we saw them do this a couple of years ago where they maintained flexibility, even though filling that cap void, whether it was a team option or non-guaranteed money on the back ends of these deals, but it just was not the case this year. So there's a lot, and the Bulls better damn well hope they make the playoffs because they've shipped out their first round picks to Orlando. So it'll be interesting. Chicago Orlando thing real quick. We mentioned Robin Lopez earlier. I am excited to see him get back to a situation where he's with Wendell Carter Jr. I would assume those two had a good relationship when they were in Chicago. Two centers, maybe they can rekindle that down there. And I think if you're trying to put your young centers around a good veteran that has consistently done the little things really well and added little wrinkles to his game throughout his career, Robin Lopez is probably on a short list of players you want to surround your young players around.
Yeah, and I love it. And Orlando is one of those weird teams where they're very, very young. I mean, a lot of young talent. And, when you lose games and you struggle and you go through those lulls, having a guy like him and the motivation that he's going to bring and the morale boost, I think is great for that team. I was thinking of teams that I thought that he could have gone where other than Orlando, and I just feel like they were perfect for him. He's not going to play a lot with Mo Bamba and, like you said, Carter and fine, but it's great for those guys to be around somebody like that. I think you look at even Dame early on, and when he was here for the couple of years that they were together, I mean, those guys are just fun to have, and it's good for those environments. And teams like Orlando's probably going to start slow. They're still young. Cole Anthony's got to figure it out. Simmons got to stay healthy, he's got to stay healthy
too. God.
So.
Yep. Yeah, but I mean, the Orlando is one of several teams I'm really excited to see. As far as in the last week, we've seen a lot of these new young backcourts come together. Yeah. We've seen in Houston, Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. are now together. In Detroit, you have Killian Hayes and Cade Cunningham. In Orlando, the one that I might be the most excited about, and yes, I'm a little bit of a Gonzaga homer, but you have Suggs and Cole Anthony. And I mean, you're talking about you can draw a line there, but a pure Northwest backcourt there. I mean, Cole Anthony, obviously with his dad ties to Portland, and then Jalen Suggs going to Gonzaga. I think it's going to be really exciting.
Markelle Fultz is still there.
Yeah, Markelle Fultz is still there. Another contract they kind of got to figure out what they're doing there, but there's a lot of really young, fun teams that have assembled in the last week.
Yeah, I mean,
Agreed.
absolutely. Russell Westbrook and LeBron James and that really young Lakers team is really making the headlines there. All right, boys. Well, we probably got to wrap up, but before we do, I just want to let Steve have a quick shout. Thanks for joining us, Blazers Edge. Where else can people find you?
So I'm the co-host of the Church of Roy podcast, also featured on Blazers Edge, but most of my work is there. I am kind of transitioning into what this off season is going to be. I'm going to try to be doing some fun interviews with former players as we move into the summer and into the dog days of the off season. But there's still a lot to talk about. Obviously, as we saw here, you know, there's a lot to talk about with this off season, even with just some minor moves, what it could mean going forward for the Blazers and the Damian Lillard situation. So you can follow me on Twitter at Steve D Hoops and find me at Blazers Edge. But I appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you.
Thanks,
As long as you said your former players, just don't try not to take too much away from blazing new trails, ex-player of the week. I mean, it's a segment that's gonna stick eventually.
No.
But yeah, man, we seriously we appreciate you coming on. We love having different people and perspectives. We've had Danny on, we've had Dia on, so it's been pretty cool to talk with somebody else. We don't get enough guests as we'd like. We just don't reach out enough as we probably should. So when we do get a chance to have you guys on here, it's always great. Fans love it. We'll definitely make sure that everything's up there for people to follow you and they keep tabs. Interviews with former players and stuff in the summer is great. And I'm glad you're doing that kind of stuff because it's cool for fans to be, just keeping up with Blazers material when it's kind of in a lull. So, well, I won't spoil anything from the summer league game, so go enjoy that. It was fun. So then we'll hopefully keep track of you, talk to you on Twitter and everything, and we appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. We are out. Peace.